Hello, everybody. Welcome to our live today. We have some really cool stuff going on today. So, we're going to be talking about DeepSeek, AI, and some other things. The cool thing is that I was able to get our team from Appalachia, a bunch of us, some of the best engineers. I say some of the best engineers in the world here with me. So lucky to have them. I wish we had 4 hours for the convo today. We only have an hour. However, I want everyone to be interactive. If you're watching this, throw your questions in the chat and so on, and we will try to get to them as quick as we can. So without any further ado, I'm going to slowly start bringing our team up here on stage, and we'll get this party rolling. All right, I think I have everybody. I think this is the most that I've ever had in a live stream before. I feel like we have the whole party here. How is everybody?
Good.
Great.
Doing good.
Awesome. So, first I want to thank Appalachia first, and second, all of you for taking the time out of your day to do this. So the topic, here's a funny thing. So I traveled into the office here, was it 4 or 5 days ago? Maybe more than that now. I'm losing track of time. I came home. I sit down in front of my laptop and I see all these things about DeepSeek. I'm like, what the heck did I miss over the period of 4 or 5 days? Because it just goes to show how fast things change, right? The rate of just growth and competitiveness in this field of tech cloud and AI is just it's crazy. So, and I'm just going to, obviously it's just going to be an open conversation, right? So I'm just going to throw it out there on the table. What did DeepSeek change? Like what makes it kind of stand out, and where's it going to go now? What are your thoughts? And anybody, feel free to chime in there.
I can jump in. I'm a technology lover in first place, so anything that comes up is exciting to me, and I just love doing the research itself, right? But what happened is when DeepSeek comes out, there's already a benchmark that we have the ability to go and try to track, right? How does it compare to the ChatGPT of the world? Before ChatGPT, we barely had any comparison other than the theory that it could happen. So now that we can go back and compare it, what took the whole world by storm is this new solution that comes from developers in China that say that they're able to produce a level of throughput and a level of, I want to say, product, right, that the original ChatGPT had. But what's beautiful about it is they were able to do it at a fraction of the cost, at a fraction of the level of effort. So the components of something like this disrupted, something like the hard work that you're required to have to build the AI engines and how it runs in the background. And now they say that they can do it more efficiently without the need for that big, expense in hardware, without waiting that long of a period to make a product that shows. I think that took the whole world by surprise in the same fashion that ChatGPT took the whole world by surprise when it first came out. So, of course, it was a very good conversation started. And like you said, a lot of noise around it.
I feel like there's, maybe a lot of people that don't really understand what it takes to run AI. We always hear about the hardware that it takes. Can any of you explain what it actually takes to make these AI platforms run? Like, what kind of compute power are we talking about here?
I think the biggest thing we've seen so far is it takes tens of thousands of graphics cards. And that's why NVIDIA's stock price took a hit when the news came out, right? It's specifically NVIDIA and the CUDA cores that are being used to train these models as rapidly as possible. And then with the CHIPS Act passed a year or two ago, limiting the kind of chips that American companies can send and sell to China, then China started to develop more of their own technology. So it's really about one of that's why NVIDIA stock took a hit when this news came out. Is maybe we don't need as many NVIDIA GPUs as we thought we did. Like before, there was a big, maybe not a bubble, but a big demand for these cards because of Bitcoin and mining. And then as that started to die down, then AI came along and kind of boosted NVIDIA's price some more, since they're the leader right now in GPU. So that's kind of the main technology behind it. But also this is one of the first big distillation models. So DeepSeek used ChatGPT to help train the model. Instead of having humans sit there and prompt it, ask it questions and correct it to make sure you get the answer you want, they had ChatGPT do it. So they've automated that system, which makes the iteration faster. So those were the two big kind of technological changes. And this is being backed, at least to some degree, by the Chinese government. So I would not, because they say it took $5 million, I would not put my life on that it took only $5 million. There's just some kind of speculation. There was an article that came out about 2 days ago from Tom's Hardware that said, actually, that's just a fraction of the training cost. So we're still kind of waiting to see exactly how true all those details are. It would be big if it's true, but we're not quite sure until someone else can replicate this. We're not positive that it's really what they said it was so far. It's a good model. It does beat ChatGPT's reasoning models in some ways, but it's mostly the efficiency and the reduced cost that scared everybody, or that made the story jump and have a hit on the financial sector for tech.
Yeah, and I think
if I could jump in on something real quick. I mean, we live in central PA. A bunch of us live in central Pennsylvania. And I've lived here almost my whole life. And for those who, talk about what it takes to run AI, like Microsoft is working on a deal with 3 Mile Island to use the nuclear plant here that melted down back when I was a kid to power AI. So when we talk about something that is claiming to use less power, less resources, it's a pretty big deal, number one. And number two, to Chris's point, I think I read that that didn't include any of the R&D, right? So those numbers are possibly skewed to present a picture that they want to present, right? So the fact remains to be seen, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that number as well. I mean, Chris, I think we saw the same article, right? I think a lot of it is they came out and they were very pointed with their language around like the cost of, what was it, like the 5 point whatever millions to 6 million. Different articles are saying different things and rounding it. But a lot of that was just estimates on like the training of the AI costs. And then, you see that NVIDIA or there's an investigation into NVIDIA because Singapore is more than 20% of the revenues for NVIDIA. So it's like, is NVIDIA selling to Singapore and then China's buying from Singapore the same hardware? So it's like, are they on the latest and greatest stuff? Are they not on the latest and greatest stuff? Are we ever going to get a full-blown answer? But then I see the estimates of, there being 500 million behind, just the hardware costs, right? Like we're talking about the AI training costs, the R&D, but then there's the massive cost of the hardware and then running the hardware. So there's a lot to it. And I don't know what's smokescreen yet. I don't know what's not smokescreen, how much we can trust of the stuff that we're seeing coming out. But there's a lot of interesting stuff about DeepSeek and, having an open database the same day that it launches, that Wiz found. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's coming out around it.
And I think to your point, Jimmy, like we're never going to get the transparency, right? Because it's China. And it behooves them to tell us that they can develop something better than the U.S. can develop at a 1% of the cost, right? Like it should stand out that they said that they developed this for $5 million, right? It was $100 million initial investment into OpenAI. So if they came out and said 75, that would probably be realistic. But to say 5 million, like that would be like if I came to you and said, "Oh, you sold this super rare baseball card for $100, but guess what? I was able to buy it for $5." You'd be like, "There's no way." Like who would sell it for? It just doesn't. It's like when you tell the tale about how you went to the moon with a rocket you built in your backyard. Everyone's like, that doesn't even make sense, right? It's the same thing here. They don't have R&D costs because I think it's a secret that they steal everything. So I'm sure they took a lot of source code from OpenAI. We're able to use that, not to mention all the data on the back end, because that's probably the biggest thing that's going to drive their AI model is the data, because you have to have those data points and points of reference in order for the model to work properly and to be as efficient as it is. You have to have all that data. So where did that come from? Well, major data collection in China alone. So every company producing in China gives that data to the Communist Party. Company that does business with China is giving up their data to them. So the amount of data they're able to collect is far exceeds anything we'll ever get in the U.S. just because of the way we do things here.
It's kind of funny because we've been reading about the TikTok ban and so on, and I think it actually went away for a day, right? But now it's back because of all the concerns. But now we're using this platform that is made by the Chinese, right? So let's talk about that for a minute. What type of concerns should we have when using a platform like this?
I can pitch in on that one because it's interesting, like you said, right? Before we even learn how to use ChatGPT to the full extent, or even like a minimum capacity in the training level, here comes a new solution that is offering, a lot more capability for a fraction of the price. Believe it or not, still to be determined. But I want to pinpoint on the training itself. Like I said, we haven't even understood how to properly train the employees and the larger audience on how to be safe when using this on a work environment, when treating sensitive information, let alone being able to interact with it in a very efficient way, right? Still a learning process because of how new and relevant it is. So here comes a new solution, like you said, that took the whole market by storm. And all of a sudden, people just being curious, okay, what makes it better? And they're going in and putting in information that they shouldn't in the first place. So it's not only the training falling behind, it's something that a colleague of ours is actually commenting on a lot of venues. He's publishing left and right on how all of this data that is being input into the system is just living into who knows where. So this data exfiltration that is going out, that is not only used to leverage training for the AI, but at the same time, they're harvesting that information. And if you have something that is able to catalog all of that and who knows, find sensitive information that otherwise should not be shared outside of a secure environment, then you have a bigger problem. So it's a combination of training, lack of knowledge, novelty of how you make the news and how this is the new solution to be used. And people just fall the fear of like, hey, I don't want to be left out or fall behind. This is a new thing that I need to use. So yeah, a lot of components fall in place of how this is being mismanaged at a whole level beyond just knowledge and training, right?
So what would you say to an organization that is thinking about using DeepSeek, right? Because we see both sides of the fence. I'm seeing online people say, don't use it. And other people saying, well, use it, right? So what would you say to an organization that is thinking about using it? But before you answer that, those that are watching, feel free. This is your time. So if you have questions you want to throw in the chat or comment, whatever, feel free. We'll be more than happy to answer them for you. So go ahead, Yoel, or whoever.
I think when you're talking about companies using this, right, first you got to look at like what are the main concerns with using DeepSeek, right? There's national security risks, there's data privacy concerns, economic and technological competition concerns, and then there's concerns around censorship and influence. So when you look at those four major categories, and then you look at what is your business model, what industry are you in, and who do you service? If you're servicing the federal government under those circumstances, should you use this? Because as of today, the U.S. Navy's already come out and said that nobody on a naval base is allowed to use the DeepSeek, period. And I don't think it's going to be far before the federal government and state governments come out and say the same thing. Like, if you're inside of our building using our equipment, you can't use this because you're going to give up trade secrets. Because that data is going to a Chinese company, and as a matter of policy from the Communist Party of China, they have to make that data available to the Chinese government by law. It's not even a question of if they're doing it. It's a 100% policy thing. They have to give that data up. So
but that's if you are using it online. If you
correct.
download it, and like I'm running it on Olama, the data is not going anywhere. I'm using the model locally, and it's just like downloading any other model that the models put out by Facebook and everything else.
But my concern with that though would be that how often do people accidentally turn things on that shouldn't get turned on, or connect things to the internet that aren't supposed to? Like now, like your proprietary data for like a big R&D project that's gonna like make you an industry leader just went to China, and they're gonna beat you to market now, and all that money's gone, all the effort's wasted. So from that standpoint, it's dangerous. It's dangerous just because like human error always has to kind of be taken into account that somebody could just do something by accident, or there's always like the threat of like malicious insiders who like on their way out the door, like, you know what, I'm going to flip this thing on and like have fun. So
yeah, I think Mike, to your point, right, there's a lot to consider here. And I think in security, we can all say, right, as being part of the security ecosystem, knee-jerk reactions are almost never good, right? I mean, we see how many clients have we seen knee-jerk reaction by a bunch of cybersecurity services once they have ransomware, right? And then a year later, they get rid of it because it's spend based off of being impacted. I think the biggest thing is it all comes down to risk appetite. When you look at using it for business purposes, I think you have to consider it that somebody else has access to your data, right? It's an AI model, just like any other AI model. However, to Joel's point, it is also housed in China, right? And based off the Communist Party's law, the Chinese government has access to all of that data. So I think it all comes back to a risk-based decision to determine what type of data are you putting into the AI? What are you expecting the AI to do? What visibility does the AI have? And making specific decisions on that. Just like Wasson, right? Joel Wasson, who downloaded, and used it locally, VLANed it off, so it has no visibility to the rest of the network, and implementing security controls. Do we trust a lot of individuals who are not technical to be able to do that? Probably not. I mean, that goes back to another thing that you posted about on LinkedIn about the cyber trust mark, right? I think a lot of things in inviting China, it's difficult to get China out of everything, right? There's motherboard manufacturers that have pieces from China. There's other technological equipment that have pieces from China, right? There's software that has pieces from China. There's vehicles and services that are provided by China. So it's difficult to get them out completely. I think it all comes down to a risk-based decision on what are you looking to use the model for? What type of data are you giving it? And what's the expected result? And just understanding what you're using. But that goes the same with any vendor that you should be looking at, right? It's just you have the added risk of this data is going into China, and it's already seen based off of the Wiz or the company Wiz that found the open database, right? It was unauthenticated. It was open to the internet. People could go in and see what was being queried, what the responses were. All of that was public for a matter of how many hours it was. Wiz told them, they locked it down, so it's no longer public. But from a proof of concept perspective, it shows you that all the stuff is being recorded. All the data is there. So it's just a risk-based decision and looking at it from that perspective.
I feel like a lot of it comes down to common sense too, right? Which applies to most things in life. We have people that are already throwing in firewall configs into it to have it analyze them and so on. And, do we really want to be throwing our firewall configs into DeepSeek or really any AI for that matter? Again, I think it just comes down to using it with common sense as well. And so here's a question. This is a question I have for myself, right? Because I was looking at their privacy policy on DeepSeek, and it mentions that the data will be housed in the Republic of China and so on. But then it mentioned about, and I was a little confused on this. It mentioned that it also monitored keyboard patterns. Do any of you know what I don't really know what they meant by that, but can any of you speak to that?
Yeah, if you look what we know about TikTok now, right? Everybody's favorite thing to be mad about at the moment. But researchers have found that TikTok has Java injectors built into it that are collecting keystrokes, right? So they're looking at what you're typing, passwords, all of that information. And if you're on a work computer, they're collecting your work passwords for your company. That then they can trace you back very easily through open source intelligence. I have to imagine that it's the same thing here. Like, I think if we really start to take a deep look at what's going on inside of DeepSeek, you're going to find out that there's a lot of spyware in there. They're collecting keystrokes. They're probably watching your camera. They're recording conversation through the mic most likely because they want all that data, right? Because AI is not just type in something in a chatbot, get chatbot responses back. It's images, it's voices, it's all of that. So the more voice data they can get, the more video data, all that data is useful to building that model out and making it more successful. And again, by getting all that, it makes it better, right? Part of the reason Grok was so valuable to Elon Musk, for instance, right, is he has all that data coming in from Twitter, but he also has all that data coming in from Tesla, because your Tesla also collects real-time road data and all that. So all of that data goes into their AI, which has made it exponentially better in a short amount of time. Like, same thing you're going to see here. They can record all that data from everybody that's using it. It's just going to become that. It's going to process data faster. It's going to do everything better than what we can produce, just because we don't have the availability to do that, right, legally. Because if me or you were to find out that Facebook or anybody else was doing that, we can sue that company. We can go and we can file FOIA requests, right? We can say, I need to know what's happening here because we have really deep concerns. But we can't do that in China. We can't just say we have really deep concerns about what DeepSeek is doing, and we need access to the source code, and we need to see what it's doing. They're just going to tell you to pound sand. So,
any other thoughts on that from anybody else?
I read a similar article in the last day or two, and what they were one of the specific things they had mentioned with the keystroke logging was actually they're looking at it more from a keystroke rhythm perspective, and looking at as actually biometric data. So they're taking it above and beyond just logging, keystrokes, trying to get passwords, that kind of information. But apparently they're able to derive some biometric data from the rhythm that one person over another uses as they're typing on a keyboard, which I found fascinating.
Chris, there's actually a technology for authentication that dates back at least 10 years that did exactly that. We're not going to name any vendors here, but it's been known for years that that's an authentication method. What they are doing in this case is, and this, I'm going to take it a step back, right? It used to be that data storage was expensive. To be able to hold large amounts of data, you would have to pay a pretty penny. But we know now that data storage is pretty much available. It's almost free at this point, depending on the service, right? So the best way you can feed information into these AI engines in general is to absorb as much data, regardless of the source, regardless of how you got it, if it's free or not, if it's just average information, to bring it in, to feed it into how they detect, how they customize a profile, how they can build something around the persona they're trying to capture here, right? So it goes beyond the keystroke, it goes beyond the camera system, it goes beyond your ability to browse for specific subjects, right? They're trying to harvest, like Prentice was saying, to your car, your maps, your internet history, all of the above. And that includes, of course, like you're mentioning, your ability to type, which, like Nora is mentioning, same as Prentice, it's unique to you. It's almost a fingerprint, is what the vendor originally called it, right? The way you type, it becomes you. So yeah, it's another way to identify you, which, by the way, it also applies to mobile, not just your computer stroke, just so you know.
So let's go back here. JD, who's a great friend of ours here at Appalachia, says it's imperative that companies should have an AI acceptable use policy now more than ever. This goes for employee training too. With the advent of AI, it creates efficiencies, and that's what people want. Let's talk about that a little bit, because we have, how many organizations out there have people within the organization going to DeepSeek's website or AI, Chat GPT, wherever, and they're just punching in information, right? So let's talk about that a little bit. How many companies out there do you think actually have a percentage of, just let's say, small to large organizations? What percentage do you think actually have these types of policies in place?
Actually have the type of policies?
Yep, actually have these in place and enforce them.
Probably like under 10%. I mean, it has to be like single digits. I know at Appalachia, we have an AI policy, right? It's don't put anything in that's confidential. Don't put any client information in, right? We don't own the space. Since we don't own the space, we have no control over the space. We have no idea what they're doing to protect the data, who has access to it, all that type of stuff, right? Probably has to be single digits. I think it's a really good point, and there needs to be training, pushed out to a lot of users as well. Because I know, when ChatGPT came out, we're all in the tech space, right? We all went and played with it. It's the shiny new toy, right? And the increase or how good it's gotten over a short period of time, people are utilizing it to take a lot of the, and I'll use Swecker's word for it, the soul sucking work, right? A lot of us utilize it to take a lot of the soul sucking work away, but you can't put any sort of confidential information in there. You can't put any sort of client information in there because otherwise it could constitute a breach, whether intended or not, right? I mean, you're giving data to another entity that no one agreed that they're allowed to have the access to that data, and you have no control over anything around how that's being used. It could be used to train the model, right? And that's all concerns and all risks that need to be taken into account. And there needs to be training for the users, and at least awareness training, right? Communicating that they should not be utilizing these models. If they are going to be utilizing these models, how to utilize them in a safe way, and safe meaning not putting the company at risk or not putting them at risk. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one thing with Appalachia, we actually block DeepSeek. So on Appalachia hardware, DeepSeek is blocked.
And you can do that on company-owned devices, but the user education is going to be the paramount thing here. You absolutely do need an acceptable use policy for AI. DeepSeek notwithstanding, people are using ChatGPT in your organization, whether you're aware of it or not. You can pretend they're not, but they absolutely are. So it's imperative that you get out there and you have this training, this employee education, give them the resources to make better decisions. Even with ChatGPT, if you're not paying for ChatGPT, the free version will use your data to train the model further. So that information out there is just, it's OpenAI's now. And you've given them permission to use it however they see fit. Now, it's not as big of a security risk as giving it to a company that's owned in part or run by the Chinese government, but it still could be a problem depending on the sensitivity of that information. But I guarantee you, people are using it. You need to find ways that are productive and helpful for them to use it. You don't want to hamstring them and not let them do their jobs, but we also need to be very clear about the kind of risks we're facing here. Like when I played with DeepSeek, I didn't put any information in. I asked it for publicly available information. Explain to me how a CUDA core works. There are questions you can ask that don't involve any sensitive information to kind of get a sense of how these things work and reason without putting any client or proprietary information in.
And what's the saying? If you're not purchasing the product, you are the product.
Right.
I mean, that definitely has to be something. And listen, end user security awareness training has always been paramount in security. And I mean, it's paramount here too, right? The users are the weakest link for any organization. And now you have people that could be utilizing a very, very cool technology in a very inappropriate way to be able to, constitute some sort of a data breach. I think there has to be some sort of end user security awareness training. There has to be communication around it. And educating users is one of the biggest responsibilities that cybersecurity professionals have, but it's also one of the most difficult, right? Because everybody has different levels of understanding of technology and different levels of caring about the security of technology, right? I think that's really good point, Chris.
Yeah, we need to recruit end users in all phases to be on our side. IT operations people cannot keep thinking of users as the enemy. We need to work with them, give them the information, give them the tools to make informed decisions that align with our policies, not see them as children who need to be boxed off and sandboxed. Some of that we'll do because it's safer, right? It's on my computer too. But I think the biggest change here that a lot of IT operations people need to face is you cannot see the end users as your enemy anymore. You need to recruit them to be working on your side.
I agree. And I think when it comes to like the AI and helping the people understand like what data you can look at and what data you shouldn't be looking at is if you sent this data to the wrong client, would it be a problem? Like, would you think if you accidentally sent this to the wrong person by accident, would you be getting talking to about it? If the answer is yes, you shouldn't put it in this chat box. Like, I think it's great for report writing when you say, hey, I need a quick blurb on this thing, shoot it to me. And it can save you a good 10 minutes of research time, but you don't want to ask it like, hey, I have this company and they're trying to do this thing. What's the best way to optimize it? You don't stay away from those types of questions.
That's actually a good point. That's a good point, Joel. If you send it to the wrong company, would it be a problem? That's a good way to think about that.
But you have the problem here is what we do is we end up in meetings with clients that are using chatbots to record the meeting.
Yeah, you're right.
So, do we have a third-party agreement on that chat bar,
Yeah. And that's the thing too. I think we talked about that the other day. You're right. You get in these meetings and the meetings are recorded with those chatbots. And so how do we know where that information is going afterward, or where it's going to sit? Is it protected? Because a lot of times in meetings, you're talking about confidential information. So that's a really good point, Joel.
But that goes back to the idea that Watson was mentioning originally, that the average user is not going to know that he can run this locally and isolated from the world, let alone that he can build your own to teach it and train it to be your ChatGPT, your own version, where you can, I mean, the term sandbox has been used in IT or cybersecurity since ever. The fact that you can isolate a device and see if the virus is actually malicious or not. So in the security field, again, it's a very select group of people that have the ability to play with that type of environments that I know is secure, is not going to have an impact on everything else. But should we increase awareness that is actually a solution? I want to go back to Chris Swecker's solution. It's like, well, part of a training as an employer, instead of just having a policy that mandates what you do, it'll be, I'm going to create an environment that you can leverage this new technology that, by the way, is as capable of, and we have the ability to control where that information is stored and how it's managed and how it's used to that extent. So it's not a matter of blocking it, making it not available. It's a matter of like creating the environment and increasing awareness is the word I'm looking for here. Is overall idea on how to best utilize the solution, that you have the opportunity to isolate it from the rest of the world, meaning that the way you use it is protected and is safe. So you create awareness on how that technology applies. Now, for those tech enthusiasts that want to take it to the next level, having the ability to run it on a Mac or a device that is powerful enough that has the hardware to do it, it goes the extra mile because it's extremely powerful. You can teach it, you can train it on a specific thing. Instead of like globally, like ChatGPT, it's able to provide answers on pretty much anything. The same with like DeepSeek. But when you have your own model that is isolated, you can train it on something specific, like, by the way, your own policies. And everything that you want to just brainstorm against that private AI engine that you have running. Is this a break? Is this something that is complying with the policy? Is this something that you see falling outside? You can confirm SLAs. And hey, is this SLA that this new third party sent me compliant with my policies? Is it something that we should be in the lookout for? So there's a lot that goes into that awareness of how this AI agents should be used and the things that you can do when you have it isolated and, of course, on a private model.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, Yoel. I think the biggest problem, right, is if you're looking to, as a business, bring in your own AI model and train your own AI model, the biggest problem is the maintenance and the hardware costs, right? Because it's fine for a little bit of hardware, not super expensive, if you just have like maybe one or two people utilizing it, whatever the use case may be. But if you then get teams that are starting to utilize that model, then you need to scale it up. It needs more power, right? So then there's maintenance costs associated with that, hardware costs associated with that, data center costs associated with that. There's a bunch of different stuff that would be akin or part of that decision. The problem then when you go to leadership of developing that plan, they look at that and say, okay, that's the cost of bringing it in-house. And then they look at the other side and it's like, but this is cheaper, right? And then, that's where the education comes in of like, it might be cheaper, but these are the problems of utilizing the open source or utilizing the website, right? And not having an agreement with a third party. So I think it's a really good point. It definitely makes sense. You could do that as a business use case. I think it's just a lot of people will then look over and say, well, it's cheaper to do it this way. Bottom line, it's cheaper. We're going to, implement that solution. But then they, open themselves up to a bunch of risk. And I think that's the problem that I think, we have to take to a lot of our clients is just the educational aspect of there's risk in dealing with any vendor. There's risk in housing your data anywhere. There's risk in using all types of services. What risk do you want to utilize and what's your risk appetite, right? And then just document it and look and trying to mitigate them.
Hey, Mike, I have a question and it kind of piggybacks off where Jimmy was talking about risk a little bit. We've been talking for most of the session about information that we're actually putting into DeepSeek and requesting, right? And we're talking about putting in confidential, proprietary, and just being very careful about what we're putting in. I'm curious what everybody's thoughts are from our team on the other side and trusting the output, just knowing that the model was built with to a certain degree, censorship involved, content filtering involved. How much can we trust the information that's actually coming back out from the model itself when we are prompting it? Are there any concerns about risk or there?
One thing you can do now, because there's multiple models out there, you can pose the same question to multiple models and check for accuracy. So I pose questions to OpenGPT and I posed the same question to DeepSeek, and you can look at the accuracy online. And I did it on my local model. And my local model took probably 3 or 4 minutes to calculate because I'm not running on the latest hardware, but it came up with the same answer, which I think is pretty amazing. You know, asking it a fairly complex math problem and getting the same result off of all 3 platforms.
And I think in that instance, Lawson, it's probably pretty accurate, right? Like if you're asking it, solve this complex math problem. Well, I think where you're going to find discrepancies in answers, though, to your point, Chris, is where are you trying to get information that's maybe problematic to China? It's not. You're probably not going to get the most accurate information in those instances. Or if it's a competitor of a Chinese company, you know, they might upsell China's company, downsell the other company as well. So I think because of the censorship that they have, and, you know, obviously they want to paint themselves in the best light, you're going to run in, you know, you're going to start to see where everything is maybe bolstered up a little bit in China's benefit and down so for everybody else, whether it's, you know, and it could be doesn't necessarily have to be the US, but if it's a German company, a French company, English company, I think, you know, they'll always say, hey, we do it better. Or, you know, if you would just say, to ask maybe like, you know, what were instances where China was caught stealing data? They'll probably tell you none, even though we know for a fact that there's different breaches that have occurred where data was stolen and used in development of Chinese products. So in those places, I don't know that you can trust the data, but then you can also go back to what Wasson said and just cross-reference that in other models and see how different they are. And I think maybe it can help to show you how the data that's being used and presented to you might be being used in a way to sway the way you think, right? Because the thing I heard recently, which I found was interesting, was like an experiment they did with hostages, where they just came in and they said, I don't want you to give me secrets, but I want you to say one bad thing about your home country, and I'll give you a meal today. And they just did it over a course of time. They eventually just created an avenue where they were like, this place is really bad, and you guys are really good because you keep giving me food, and I keep telling you everything that's wrong, even if it's a small thing, right? So if you can just keep planting small seeds, as far as propaganda goes, you know, that goes a long way, because eventually you're just going to see enough of it to where you think it's not so bad. They're not doing anything wrong. Like what they're doing is great. And, you know, so I think they can use it in that way too, which is kind of dangerous.
So Chris, two things on that too. One is usually if you're trying to do that practice against an AI model in form of research, first you have to have a base knowledge of what you're prompting against, right? You have to have the ability to filter through what is called, and I don't necessarily agree with hallucination. It's not that it's coming up with things. It's just the way it was trained, right? But at the same time, bias on the product itself you're using. If you're asking it something that is unique and they might give you an answer that was tailored behind the scenes, you might not necessarily get the answer that you have other ways of confirming if that's a source of truth or not. But ultimately, it's going to be a combination of those two, right? Do you know enough to determine if the answer is actually accurate? Do you know enough of the background of what you're trying to research to make sure that the answer is not biased? But at the same time, do you have the ability to challenge it and ask, see if it corrects along the way? Because I've run that exercise multiple times. I asked for a simple prompt to something that I might know the answer, how to make colors or something like that. And then when you go back and you said, well, what about this? Because I've also used this other method. And it corrects on the stance and said, oh yeah, that also works. And I'm like, that wasn't even an option to start with. So yeah, you have to have previous experience on what you're prompting against. You have to learn about bias, and you have to have a recourse to go back and challenge it and confirm before you submit that to something that you might think is the whole truth when you haven't even confirmed it outside of the AI engine itself.
And one of the dangers there is going to be, you know, if I'm asking a math question, I expect a pretty good answer. If I'm asking about Tiananmen Square in 1989, I'm not expecting a good answer. But for anybody who's been hearing us talk about this, and if you want to try and run your own, I think what a couple of us use is Open Web UI. You can put that in a Docker container and a Proxmox container, or make it its own VM. And that will let you download different open source models like DeepSeek or the Olama models. And they also have what's called an arena model, which is where you have a couple different models fight and fight each other for the answer. So that's an interesting way to see what angle the different models are coming at it from. But with any of this AI stuff, just kind of like in the early days of Google and Wikipedia, you know, those of us who are old enough to remember those early days were told just because it's on Wikipedia or Google doesn't mean it's right. You still want to have some verification there after you get that output that this is actually the right answer. That's not the end of your research. That's a good step in the right direction, but I wouldn't completely trust it until I'd verified it from another source somehow.
I think you guys make good points there. And another thing I would mention, because we said early on that OpenAI was kind of used to build this model. And so you have to also think back to how many articles have you read about OpenAI where it just made up stuff? Like it made up links. Like it would give you false links to research. Like if it didn't know the answer, it would just kind of make things up. So if you're basing it off of that, and there's things that were inherently made up to begin with, it's just going to perpetuate that further too. So like you got to really kind of have some knowledge. You can't trust that as your number one research point. It should really just be to help simplify things you already know, or to get quick answers to things you know, that where you can look at it and say, this all looks right, now I can utilize this information, as opposed to trying to learn something new, because you could just be getting completely false information based on the fact that it couldn't find it, so it just threw something together that sounded pretty good.
I have a question. You know, we saw the government get involved with TikTok. Do you guys see that happening with DeepSeek?
How long had TikTok been out before the government got involved?
Long time.
Right.
Long time. Yeah.
It'll take the government a long time to figure this one out.
Yeah. So what would you say to an organization?
Just a quick add to Joel Credit. DeepSeek says China has adhered to a peaceful path of development and firmly opposes all form of cyber theft.
There you go.
Never been caught.
There you go.
You trust that? Yeah. So what would you say to an organization then that is looking to use AI, you know, any type of AI or DeepSeek in general, you know, to make them more efficient, to help them with processes and so on? What would you say to an organization that is looking to use these types of platforms? Like, what would you recommend?
I say that if you have a use case and you have a method that truly works, I think this is not the time to get creative on how we could maybe utilize this and then try to adventure into that realm. We have no shortage of providers or solutions out there claiming to be AI based to give you something in return, when we all know it's kind of like, you know, it's a face that they're wearing to try to sell you the business. But at the same time, is the use case that you're trying to do here to summarize documents, to get something that this is known to be a good source or a good solution to those type of issues, right? Archive a large amount of data, things like that. If you have the ability to develop something in-house that has that use case for it, by all means, go ahead and explore it. But at this time, if it's just an appetite that I want to play with a new toy, I think that every other environment we've been on, everybody wants like the most expensive MacBook available. That doesn't mean that you can provide it. That doesn't mean you're going to make it just like, you know, that way to be accessible. Ultimately, it depends on the use case, like I said, for the organization, the appetite to really be on that edge of what's next in technology that we should leverage to do it. But at the same time, you have to understand your business thoroughly to see how this fits into that and in the future state of that, of course.
And currently, I think the way you develop is probably the best method would be to use Microsoft sandboxing and OpenAI as a service and develop your own in-house model for training your data and keep it, you know, you're trusting that the agreement between OpenAI and Microsoft is keeping your data safe. But in that sandbox environment, you can develop an AI product that probably will lead a lot of efficiencies to your business. If you're searching through legal documents or, you know, archived amount of data that your business has created over time, I mean, AI is amazing at that. rewriting manuals, rewriting stuff, but you got to expect to spend a pretty good amount of money to build your sandbox and to buy AI as a service.
And Joel, I've seen it used as a vault almost, that you don't necessarily have to have a physical archive for documents anymore, and people are using it to just store years of worth of audit information. And they do it in that fashion, right? It's a .gov license. It's an isolated environment that, yes, Microsoft has access to it, but you're trusting it based on the structure of that type of license that is going to be somewhat secure from the rest of the world. Think like we have discussed, the CMMCs, enclaves that you can create online. So when you generate it that way, I have seen instances is not being sold as a product just because it's Microsoft specific, but you can do, clear up warehouses worth of documents into a vault that ultimately allows you to do index, audit, anything against that, compare historical data, look at trends, and what ultimately becomes is a business intelligence, information source as well, that you can go back and reference years worth of like VIP clients information or audits, previous results. And of course, that is more useful than what I have personally seen is like storehouse, I would say warehouses full of like boxes and papers, and parsing through those is not fun though.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me would just be establishing kind of like the rules of engagement with AI, right? AI acceptable use policy, right? And training the end users on how to effectively use it. You don't want, if you're going to use something that's a SaaS product, right, and you're not housing the solution, there needs to be some sort of agreement, like, to what Joel was talking about, utilizing Microsoft environment. If it's your environment, that's great. Using infrastructure as a service or whatever it may be. If you're just going to utilize a SaaS solution, there needs to be some sort of vendor agreement in place. That way, if there is some sort of breach, you have something to fall back on. It's not just utilizing, open source AI, right, and then just feeding it a bunch of business information. That can't be the way that people interact with it moving forward. There needs to be end user training. There needs to be AI training awareness, or there needs to be, an AI policy, acceptable use policy in place, and businesses need to look at it and figure out how they're going to utilize it, and then implement it to meet their business use case. Right. That's the biggest thing. There needs to be discussions about it, because people are using AI regardless of if the companies want them to or not. The biggest thing is just making sure that you're putting some sort of fences around the problem, right?
Well, and businesses are going to have to use it because it's going to be a competitive advantage. If you're not providing solutions generated through AI, maybe if it's customer service or whatever, it is going to be a cost savings. It is going to save money because it can interpret language better than we've ever seen. So the future is amazing as far as like being able to interact with AI. And it could, I just watched a video on Gemini stream training off of screenshots. So it can read the screen, tell you where to click the mouse, tell you how to put the data in. So you could use it from training purposes, or you could just say, you know what, why don't we just have this guy, the AI do it? So it's going to be a competitive advantage for businesses going forward.
Well, that's just like using ChatGPT's. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Prentice.
I think like the examples you guys gave are like great examples of why you should use it, right? And like that's how you should use it. But I think when you look at when you shouldn't use it is like when your business is built around developing new products. Like if you're in like pharma, for instance, or if you're in the building of medical devices, things that you don't want getting out before you go to market. Like you don't want to put test data in these AI models. Like you really don't want to do that, because if they get breached, all of that data you've been pumping in there is now belongs to somebody who's going to sell that data for probably a good amount of money. So, but yeah, I think if you need, like, you're a small business and you need to write up some policies, you can say, hey, I need an acceptable use policy, and it can pump that out and be awesome at it. And that's not a detriment to your business. But if you're saying, like, I'm trying to figure out this really complex computation in regards to figuring out this problem specific to a product I'm building, that's probably not a good use. Like, that's when you want to be like, we have to figure this out with what we got in-house right now.
I'll piggyback.
You can find a better way to secure it.
I'll piggyback what Joel said there. Even as far as developing policies and things like that, if you are an organization and and you're concerned about the things that we talked about today, do you have policies in place? Do you have employees that are using it, and don't really have any control of what's being put in it? Our team at Appalachia, we're always happy to answer questions. Check out our Appalachia Technologies Facebook page. Obviously, I got to plug the website here. So appalachiatech.com, check it out. If you want to have a conversation with any of our guys or women, please check out the site. Obviously we're rolling up on time here, and we wish, this is all of our passions, right? So we wish we could talk for hours, but time, just doesn't allow it. So, but we definitely can help you, with any of those types of things. So, last thing I'll say before we kind of finish up with finishing thoughts is, we have hundreds of people watching now between all the platforms. So if you have questions or thoughts, this is kind of your last chance to ask them. We'd love to hear from you in the meantime. So, otherwise, any last thoughts from any of you?
I think while the tools are new, a lot of the approach is not. You need a good data governance policy. You need good acceptable use policies. These are just things that your company probably already has in some way, shape, or form. It's just that the tools and the way people are using them are different. So you don't need to be completely off put by it. I don't think there's any compelling business case at this point that any business needs to be using DeepSeek instead of something like ChatGPT, OpenAI, that are all even Olama if you want to run it locally. There's a lot of options that are fairly safe. While I would not call DeepSeek safe, there's Olama and ChatGPT and other ways you can do this and experiment and start to use that as a competitive advantage. I would just encourage everybody, don't be scared of AI as a whole. There's a lot of good it can bring. We want to be doing this intelligently and making sure that our policies are in place and that everything's lined up so that we have our data integrity. But it's also really exciting to what this is going to do for our businesses. And like I told Jimmy, like, I'm excited about AI automating away the soul sucking work, the work that people do not get enthused to do. No support tech gets out of bed in the morning, ready to write ticket notes. They want to help people. They want that human connection. And if we use these tools properly, it'll help us be more and more human by taking some of this kind of busy work off our plates. That's kind of my vision for AI and how we're going to use it in the future. And I think there's a lot of good that can come from it as long as we're diligent and smart about how we implement it.
Yeah, I think the big thing is it's a force multiplier, right? There's not a lot of things that have come on. Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot, but like you can point to times in history when like force multipliers came out, right? Computers, big one, right? Everything used to be like paper, pencil, snail mail, emails now out, right? Computers are now out. People can do a lot of their work, on the computer. It's a huge force multiplier, right? People get more efficient. One person can do more things. So it's less spend from a business perspective to be able to achieve the same outcome. The outcomes get faster, right? AI as a tool, it's a massive force multiplier. And the biggest thing is it's the worst it's ever going to be today. And that'll be true tomorrow. And that'll be true the next day. And that'll be true the next, right? It's always going to get better. And I think it behooves a lot of organizations to understand the potential risk that AI brings to organizations from a security perspective, but also a business perspective. To Wassen's point, companies that aren't leveraging AI, they're going to fall behind, right? Because every other company is utilizing that force multiplier. They're able to do things more cheaply. They're able to come to the result faster. So I think it's a massive force multiplier. It's a fantastic tool. There just needs to be education to a lot of the users to understand how to use it safely, right? To not provide any sort of confidential data to it if you don't have a policy in place that protects you from that. If you don't have an agreement in place to be able to provide something to it, if you don't have your own model, because there's a ton of different ways that AI is currently being utilized, right? Machine learning, and then you have the large language models. Machine learning has been a buzzword in the industry for years, right? And just looking at algorithms, large language models, the next kind of thing outside of that. So there's a lot of growth in this space. The space has grown rapidly. I mean, we're talking what ChatGPT came out in 2020, 2021, somewhere around there publicly, like ChatGPT 3. It's phenomenal how fast this has gotten. And everybody was I remember as an aside, and I told the team this. I remember it was funny when the girls that I have in high school, my girls would come home and be like, "Oh, you can tell this picture's AI generated. Look at all the fingers. The fingers are weird. The faces are weird, right?" And now they're like, "Well, it's kind of weird. There aren't really any AI images anymore out there." I'm like, "Nope, they're still out there. They've just gotten better. You can't tell anymore, right?" AI is always going to get. Oh, thank you, JD. Yeah, fall of 2022. So it's even faster than what I was thinking it was. But yeah, this space is phenomenal. It's just one of those companies definitely need to take a look at it and take it seriously because it's not going away. The genie is out of the bottle. It's a fantastic tool to utilize. People just need to learn how to utilize it safely, as with anything else in the industry, as with any other service.
You know, my father-in-law told me about 2 weeks ago that AI was just a fad and it was probably going to go away. And I said, I have a feeling you said that when the internet came out too. So.
I had, and this is a story time. When I was in Boy Scouts, one of my scout leaders was at high school, like the kitchen lady, when you'd go and like punch your number out, whatever, and they ring you up. She didn't have email, and she only had a very old phone. This is back when smartphones were just kind of coming out. I graduated in high school in 2012, so I'm still kind of young. But it was like just kind of when smartphones were coming out, and she was like, "I don't have a computer. I don't have email. It's all a fad. Technology will go away." So yeah, I definitely I know what that feels like to talk to somebody that believes that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to the entire team, and again, thank you, Appalachia, for allowing us to do this. The time from everybody. Hopefully, those of you that are watching this were able to gain something out of this. And again, check out our website. We'd love a follow at our Appalachia Technologies LinkedIn page, so check that out as well. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you all have a great day. So take care, guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.